Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I'm talking about watches. Well, I've recently bought myself a used SKX009. And of course it's used because these watches are no longer in production. They are out there on the second-hand market, and there are occasionally some new old stock. However, the prices for these watches have gone up considerably since they discontinued them. Now, this watch is heavily reviewed out there on the internet, so I'm not going to do a full in-depth review of it. What I really want to do is just show off the watch and talk about whether it is actually worth the price that people are asking. Or perhaps should we move on from this watch and just move into the future, look into the newer watches that Seiko is releasing. Now, just before we flip the camera around, if you haven't hit on that subscribe button, I'd really appreciate it if you did so. All right, let's flip this camera around now. Let's look at this watch and let's take into consideration what they're asking for it and see whether it is still worth the money. Should we still go out there and buy one on the used market? Let's check it out. So the SKX series was released in 1996. It took over from a predecessor to the SKX range, and they discontinued it in about 2018, but there was still some new stock at the time, so it continued selling as a sort of new watch through to 2019. But why do people love this watch so much? Why was it so popular, and why does it still continue to be so popular? Well, I think there's quite a few reasons why it is so popular. Firstly, the looks of the watch. It is a simple yet really elegant looking watch, but a watch that also does so much more than look good. It has so much functionality. Obviously, it's a proper diver's watch, a watch that you can take diving, a watch that you can absolutely trust in its 200 meters of water resistance. But it also has the obvious functionality of being very good at telling the time. It is very, very easy to read that. And obviously that is the primary reason for getting a watch, isn't it? It also has the day and date complication, making a very nice, easy, everyday watch to use, which has all the functionality that we really need out of it. It also still has very good lume, so at night time it is still a very easy, good watch to wear and use. But I think the main reason why this watch is so popular is how comfortable and how well it fits on wrist. And it fits so many different wrist sizes as well. And that has to do with two things. Firstly, this case shape. These curved sides, how it transitions, how it curves, how it looks and how it feels. It is such a lovely, comfortable watch to wear on wrist. And secondly, the dimensions that make it so nice on wrist. And those dimensions being 42 millimeters of a case diameter. It is 13.3 millimeters thick. It has a lug to lug of 47 millimeters and a lug width of 22 millimeters. And this is one of my favorite sort of sizes of a watch, that sort of 42-22 size. It is a really nice, comfortable size and it looks good on wrist. It also continues to have some really good functionality with the bezel. It is a very easy bezel to use. And wow, it has that lovely muted Seiko bezel action. Absolutely gorgeous. One of the nicest bezel actions that I have come across. And when I talk about it being comfortable and looking good on wrist, it just fits wonderfully on my 6 3/4 inch wrist. It sits lovely on top of my wrist, but it sort of curves onto it. It feels very comfortable. It's just the lovely feeling watch on my wrist. And I really do think that is probably the primary reason why this watch is so popular. That sort of feel on wrist. It is quite magical, especially at this sort of price range, both when it was first sold, as it went up in price over the years, and even now at a second-hand, slightly inflated price range. So speaking of price, this watch was selling for around about 200 Australian dollars new just prior to being discontinued. It obviously went up in price over the years. Being a watch that came out in the mid-90s, it would have been substantially cheaper at the time just due to inflation. But then when they did discontinue it, there was still lots of new old stock out there, but the prices started going up and up and up, and it probably got a little bit overpriced for what it is. However, over the last couple of years, now on recording this in 2022, prices have come down to a much more sort of reasonable range. And I found that sort of the price of these watches now range from a used condition from around about the 300 Australian dollars up to probably around about 500 Australian dollars for really good new old stock. So you may think, okay, well, I'm happy to pay 300 Australian dollars for this watch. That's a reasonable price. It's a lovely watch. It's a very iconic watch to have in the collection. But it is worth taking into consideration two things. Firstly, if you buy a second-hand watch just like this one. It is now about 5 years old. It is now getting towards the period of time where this movement inside here is going to need to be serviced. Obviously, we don't need to rush to get these things serviced. It's sort of up to you whether you want to maintain it completely on schedule or whether you want to push those time rates out. It slightly depends on how much you're going to be wearing it, but you do need to start thinking about, well, that is going to be an added cost to this watch. Obviously, compared to buying a brand new Seiko, it is now 5 years closer to needing that service. The positive of that, however, is if you are going to get it serviced, you then have the option and the ability to having the movement upgraded. One of the biggest negatives of this watch, or one of the biggest complaints about this watch when it was getting towards the discontinuance time, was the movement inside. Inside here we have the 7S26 movement. It does not have hacking, it does not have hand winding. It is something that this watch doesn't have, and people will always sort of concerned about it, wanting it to be upgraded to one of the newer movements like the 4R36 movement. So if you are considering buying one of these and you are wanting to look after it and you are wanting to get it serviced, well, it does give you that opportunity to upgrade the movement if you want to do so, because the service cost of this watch is probably close to or similar price to actually just replacing the movement. We also need to take into consideration, now that the watch is getting a little bit older, especially if you buy one that's a little bit older like this one, there are things that are going to deteriorate slightly, including the lume. The lume on this watch is actually quite good, it's maintaining quite well, but when I put it up against a brand new watch, well, it's not quite as good as a brand new Seiko. So it comes down to two questions that I ask myself now about this watch. Firstly, does this watch deserve a spot in your collection now? Now that it has been discontinued, now that it has been superseded by other newer Seikos, now that newer Seikos have more upgraded, sort of better movements with hacking and hand winding? Well, I can answer that question very, very easily. I can say that it absolutely deserves a place in everybody's collection, no matter what your budget, because it is a wonderful watch. It is an iconic watch, and it is an iconic watch for a very good reason, because it is such a good watch. It is such a comfortable watch. It is a watch you can wear every single day, and I do wear this watch a fair amount, even though I do have quite a few watches in my collection. However, the next question is a lot harder to answer. Now we know that we are going to be spending between $300 and $500 Australian dollars on it. Now that we know that there's a reasonable chance we're going to have to service it much earlier than a brand new watch, does it still justify the cost of buying one of these? Especially when, for the same sort of money, you can buy yourself a brand new Turtle or a brand new Samurai. You get all the features that this one has, a proper diver watch, a proper Prospex Seiko watch for the exact sort of same money, but it's not going to need to be serviced anytime soon, and it's going to have that more upgraded movement inside of it. Well, I'm going to answer this in two parts. Well, from two perspectives. If you have quite a healthy watch collecting budget, if a lot of your watches in your collection have lovely Swiss names on them and you are able to justify spending a reasonable amount on watches, then you should absolutely have one of these in your collection. If you can absolutely pay for one of these and not be too concerned about money coming out of your bank account, then you should definitely have one of these in the collection. It's an amazing watch, and even though it is much cheaper realistically compared to much, much more expensive watches, it really is an icon for a very good reason. However, for us on slightly more affordable budgets, or people who are on an even less budget than I am for collecting, it becomes a slightly harder question, because as I've said, for the same sort of money as buying one of these, you can buy yourself a Seiko Samurai or a Turtle, and it has a lot more features going for it. So it comes more down to your personal choices. Do you want this particular watch in your collection? And what I'm going to say from my perspective on my watch budget, yes, it was worth it. Obviously it was worth it because I have bought it, haven't I? And now that I have bought it, and now that I am wearing it, it has certainly become a permanent feature in my collection. And I think that is saying something for me, because I do try to keep my core collection of watches down to a smallish sort of amount of watches. If I let that run away too much, it becomes too much money involved into my core collection, and plus I then can't wear them as much as I want, especially since I'm getting a lot of other watches coming and going for both this channel and just for my own general use and enjoyment. So for this to join the permanent core collection within my collection, it is saying something about how good this watch is and that I'm willing to spend the money on it. So let's flip the camera around now, and I'll give you some of my final thoughts about this watch and about it joining my permanent collection. So when I bought my SKX, I got it for a reasonable price. I didn't get ripped off. I don't think I overpaid for the watch, but I certainly didn't get it for an absolute bargain. These watches are a little bit hard to come by at a reasonable price, so when one did come up in good condition, I did jump on it. But I have to admit, when I did buy it, I wasn't sure if it was a watch that I was going to keep long term. I thought perhaps that it might be an interesting watch to own. I'd never owned one before. They are a very well-known, well-loved watch, and I thought I really do want to experience that myself. But now that I've had it, and now that I've had it for quite some time, I absolutely understand why people absolutely love these watches. They are just beautiful on wrist. They fit better and feel better than almost any other watch that I have owned. They look great, they have heritage, they have functionality, they have almost everything going for it. And I'm going to say that it's going to stay in my collection. I don't see it leaving, which is a little bit of a surprise to me. The only thing I do wish that it had was hacking and hand winding. It's not a bad thing that it doesn't, but it is a nice little thing to have, especially when it is part of a rotation. It does tend to stop on me a lot. But there is a positive of that. When it gets due for a service, and it is getting closer to being due for a service, when I'm ready to spend that money on it, I'll probably just swap it out for a 4-hour movement. It'll probably cost around about the same anyway. And if I'm going to put that money into the watch, well, I might as well look at upgrading the movement. But I don't really want to change anything else about the watch because it is such a good looking watch, a good watch on the wrist. And that's my final thoughts about the SKX. I think if you can get one at the right price, I think it's worth buying. I think it's still worth getting one and getting it into your collection. But don't pay the overinflated prices. You know, I don't think you should pay overinflated prices on any watch. I just don't think it's really worth it. And it hurts your soul a little bit when you buy something and you think, oh, I got ripped off here. Just keep your eyes out, find one at a reasonable price, go try it on, enjoy it, and have one in your collection. Well, thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Hope to see you in the next video.